My name is Jack Gross, president and co-founder of Second Half Network LLC, and we are fired up to officially launch our new podcast and video series. This is more than highlights and box scores. We're diving into real lives of athletes, the grind behind the scenes, the pressure, the sacrifices, the victories nobody sees. Most importantly, the transition every athlete eventually faces when the game slows down and the next chapter begins. From NIL and branding to business, careers, and life after sports, we're giving athletes a platform to tell their story. Every episode brings authentic conversations with current and former athletes, creators, coaches, and industry leaders who are building what comes after the final whistle. This is where sports, business, media, and opportunity all collide. Welcome to the next era of athlete storytelling. Welcome to Bullpen Talk.
Welcome back to episode 6 of the Bullpen Talk. Today we have sports data scientist Sam Bruchhaus for SumerSports, ex-Tulane alum. So we're glad to have you on today, Sam.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me, fellas.
Yeah, welcome to the show. So, Sam, you kind of want to tell the viewers a little bit about your story, where you came from, and how you ended up working for SumerSports.
Yeah, I'm originally from Lake Charles, Louisiana. So I'm a Louisiana boy who took it to Tulane, where I played football and I was a computer science major. And so basically, when I started trying to see how to get into sports, I thought there was really 3 items to get into operations. Number 1 was get a JD or go to law school, which I didn't really want to do. Number 2 was play or coach or scout, and I was playing at Tulane. And then the third was analytics, which is fairly new. Probably developed with, computers and stuff like that in the last 20, 30 years, really ramped up in particular in football and basketball, maybe the last 10, 15. And so I was a computer science major as a result. And so between my playing experience and my educational background, I was a graduate assistant at Notre Dame as well, where I got a master's in analytics. I jumped into sports. And so first I worked in the sports business. I worked for the Drone Racing League, and then I jumped to SumerSports, where I'm now a football data scientist and draft analyst, where I work primarily on building models to watch football and analyzing the draft on the SumerSports show.
Yeah, I mean, that's a super unique story. And obviously, you played, a few years ago, and with the ever-changing landscape of the NCAA, I mean, do you want to kind of walk through, the viewers through, what you saw during your time playing, and then, the kind of mess we're in right now?
Yeah, so when I was playing, the transfer portal had just started, and NIL, it was clear that NIL was coming. And my first introduction to this issue was with the NCAA football games being discontinued, which obviously they're back now, which is awesome. But it was quite clear to me that at some point, the NCAA was not going to be able to properly govern, in particular, football. And so add in COVID to that mix, where you already have a lot of shifting tides with the way that the game is played, the fans, etc. It was, I wish I could say that it was shocking, but it really wasn't. And so we had multiple guys who transferred through the portal that were immediately eligible. They loosened the grad transfer rules when I was a sophomore and junior. Justin McMillan ended up starting for us that year at Tulane, and he had transferred from LSU basically during the summer. And so it lends itself to an interesting point. And I think for listeners of this podcast or student athletes right now, you have to try to be on the bleeding edge of it. Now, obviously, don't do anything morally wrong. I do think there are some things, particularly mostly from the college side, that toes the line. But there's no reason to not try to maximize your NIL. There's no reason to try to not maximize where you can play through the transfer portal. And frankly, I think it's going to be like this for the next 3 to 5 years, unless Congress gets involved, but Congress takes forever anyway. But that's kind of my main view on how this is going. And it's informed kind of from my experience. I mentioned that, I was there during COVID. As a result, I was one of the founding members of our social justice coalition. And that was a major portion of it, that the players could really come together and make a voice for themselves. And I think that should be the goal from the player student athlete side with respect to NIL in particular.
That's an interesting point you bring up. It's like there's a lot of chaos right now in college football and college sports. But if you're an athlete, is this not the best time to be playing right now? Because when you played, this wasn't happening. Like you wouldn't have been making money back in whenever you played. But now, if you're an athlete, you can make up to millions of dollars. So if you're an athlete, I don't see why you would want to come together and unionize and be like, okay, let's put limits on what we're making. Because, like, they can make whatever.
Well, I think I wouldn't look at it that way.
Okay.
I think the goal of the union would be to the goal of any union is to like protect the rights of those folks. And so there's gonna come a point in time in which the NCAA is going to grab the NCAA, or at least whatever ends up being built, is brought about and kind of gains the upper hand again. Now, like the genie is out of the bottle, but like what unionization would do would be more to protect from some of these like kind of no-show contracts where people will put contracts down on the line and then not pay out, and then find these like weird rules. And I think in particular, as we start moving to a model where like these coalitions or brands are locking people in and putting on the contract that you have to play at this place for that long, that's where unionization would come in and help. But I do generally agree that this is the best time to be a college athlete. Like you can really bounce around and find a niche for yourself while also, making money for your time. And I think that's what most people don't realize, even at like the D2 or D3 level, is the amount of time that it takes to play a college sport. Like you're up at 5 a.m. if you're a morning team. You're working out from 5 a.m. probably to somewhere around 9 to 11 is when you're finally done with probably everything that you have to do for the day. And that's the off-season obligation. That doesn't include travel. That doesn't include games. That doesn't include, your own work, your homework, etc. Like it takes a massive amount of time to be a student athlete, even so that you often see when people go to the pros, they're like, I didn't really know what to do with my time because I was spending so much time being a student athlete. And now I actually probably do my craft less, but it's more focused. And so I think that's kind of the crux of where we're going, that time can actually be monetized now. And I think that's the massive, massive difference from when I was playing.
Yeah, and I like totally agree with all like the NIL stuff because I mean, if you're filling the seats, you're a good player, and you're producing, like you deserve to get paid at that scale. But I think there's a big issue right now where it's like you're paying to win, but you're not really seeing that. I'm a baseball fan, so specifically like LSU baseball spent a lot of money, didn't even make it to Omaha, and you're seeing that throughout the country. So, I mean, like through your analytics background, do you think there's like a factor that, teams need to take into play when they're actually just picking up these players rather than them, say, like producing at, like a mid-major and then you're expecting the same like result at like an LSU or like Alabama?
Yeah, I mean, the best example of this is the Florida State team a couple of years ago in football that basically paid for an entire defensive line. That defensive line then basically became the Rams defensive line, Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. And then they had various other guys who it was a full NFL defensive line that basically started the next year in the NFL and had multiple Rookie of the Year candidates. And the next year they did the same exact playbook and it just kind of fell flat. We've seen this a little bit with Colorado as well. And you mentioned, LSU baseball and stuff like that. I think it's tough. I think there are sports that lend themselves more to kind of falling flat when you take that approach. And I think football is one of them because talent filters up in football, but it's really difficult to level adjust in football, at least right now, where, there's a big difference from playing at Ball State versus playing at Ohio State. And I think because that jump is a little bit more like potentially, the jump between college football and NFL, you start to see those rates. And like now we're getting into data science talk, but you start to see those rates of failure. Basketball, for example, I think is one where if you pay, you will almost always win. It's a skill-based game. The level adjustments are well known. The transfers are extremely frequent. There's way more teams. and players stabilize. Like players don't necessarily stabilize in their statistics in football definitely not over a 12-game sample. So all that to say, I think it depends by sport. But and ironically, baseball probably should be a sport that we get a sense of that. But again, like level adjustments are very, very well studied in the MLB, in the minors. But I think football in particular is the one where, for example, Texas Tech this year, I don't know if y'all saw, but Brendan Sorsby got in trouble and now is involved in the supplemental draft. They lose a quarterback, but they have a young quarterback who I thought was pretty good last year. Their entire defensive line went to the NFL. There's a real chance that team, despite spending a ton of money, could just fall flat. So I think in particular, football is the one where the transfer portal is causing all this chaos because you actually will have times that you spend the money and it doesn't work out.
I think that's so interesting that in basketball and in baseball, we've seen analytics presence rise over the past years. Obviously, Moneyball, that story was the start of it for baseball. And you just touched on it a little bit, but I'm just wondering, why have we not seen that rise in football as much? Like, what's the reason? And also, what are ways that it can rise? Like, where do you see it rising in football?
Here's what I'll say is, number one, there's a strong push for college football analytics, but there's a couple technological factors that factor in. Number one is the idea that literally there's no governing body. Like in football, the NCAA does stuff, but like for the most part, it's the SEC, it's the Big 12, et cetera. So to get anything done on a uniform level, you basically have to work across the conferences, and that's really hard. And so the reason why I bring this up is like let's think about like next gen stats in the NFL. Next gen stats is fed by RFID trackers. In order to implement those trackers, you need a high level of technological expertise and customization in all the stadiums with all the players' equipment, and you have to be able to do it for all 32 teams. That does not happen in college right now, and it's not shared because there's no like union really. So like union of the teams of the colleges, and so because of that disjointed nature of college football, the technology adoption across the board that would be needed is not there. So the secondary thing would be, and like this is like a simple thing, but the secondary thing would be great. We'll just use, for tracking technology that has been the big boost for NFL analysis, particularly for companies like my own. The next step would be great. We'll just get it from the film or we'll get it from the TV copy. Well, the issue is that, again, that's not standard. There's different pixelations. It's in different locations. Some places cut things off. Some places don't. There was a thing with Colorado last year where of the field goal post was like always on in their end zone copy, and it was really strange. And there's so many teams, there are 155 FBS teams, where it's like it takes a lot of work to have that technological, prowess at any given point in time. And so I think it's really less of a analytics adoption problem, because I think Tulane was a great example. Tulane is a great example of doing this with the way that they spend money, with their approach to fourth downs, basically across coaches, et cetera. But I think it's more of a technological and organizational issue in football as compared to other sports.
Yeah, and I kind of go off what you were saying too, is like, I know for the SEC baseball tournament, that new ABS system, which is the automated strike zone, was present. So I'm just like wondering that if like, schools are seeing this and they're like, we're trying to set up our players for success. Like, why should we, look at these other schools that can't afford it or don't have the technology to do it? Like, why do we want to play them, have them as competition and then not essentially set our players up for success and get better recruits? And that's where these questions come in, is like, you see these ADs saying, oh, like we want to, start our own conference. I think Kirby Smart said that was like, well, the SEC, doesn't need to play these teams. And if like we play those schedules, everyone in the SEC would make, the college football playoff. So I'm just like, want to hear your opinion on that. Is like, could you foresee like, teams starting their own thing? Maybe like you obviously mentioned a union, but like, where do you see this going in the next 5 years, like realistically?
I think it ends up maybe not in 5 years, but maybe in like 15, looking like English soccer. I think is where this goes. If you look at the way that English soccer originated, it was generally just guys like us going to the field and playing. And then it just over time became, oh, a lot of people are coming to the game. A lot of people are invested. Let's do bigger stadiums. Let's get better players, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's still kind of the crux of the idea that if you go down to, the fourth or fifth division, it's just some dudes who, are movers or computer scientists or whatever, just playing with their buddies. Like I've met people who played in the Irish C tier basketball league because they just signed up and they were technically like professional athletes, but it's at that point it's like semi-pro or whatever. But in theory, if they would won, they could have gotten to the first division. I think that ethos is what's going to end up happening where you're going to have number one, we have to get the rivalries back. Like, and we have to stop the crazy travel. So you're basically going to get the reshuffling of divisions or conferences by geography again, because the money is too good to not have those rivalries. Notre Dame needs to be playing USC at any given point in time. Like that's a big money game. You have to be having, Oregon State, et cetera. So I think it'll end up being that, and teams will kind of shuffle in and out. There'll be relegation and stuff like that all the way. And I think it honestly may happen all the way down to the D3 level as well. I think that's what it ends up looking like. The difference, though, and this is critically different than English football and in professional sports in particular, is that college, the institution of American universities, and the loyalty to American universities is very distinctly American. There's not really anything else that resembles it on earth, and is, when it comes to sports, is pretty irrational. I am going to support Tulane no matter what, if they're good, bad, irrelevant, because I want to go hang out with my buddies. That's how it is at every school. And some of the schools do have that geographic. LSU, Ohio State does have that geographic component where even people that didn't go to that school still root for them. So when it's a geographical thing and it's just your hometown team, like maybe you won't root for them if they're not good. I'm going to the games no matter what, because I just want to go see my friends, because I went to college with them and that's what we do. So it's a very unique thing where at any given point in time, someone can dump money into it. And any given point in time, one or two boosters, for lack of a better word, can basically take control of a conference, of a college, of a team, etc., and really make decisions. So that's why I think it's way down the line, because someone is just going to, it basically happened with Notre Dame and USC, where someone just got upset that something happened, that Notre Dame basically had a clause in their contract saying if they were ranked in the top 12, they basically had to be in the college football playoff, even though that necessarily the rules didn't say that outside of their contract. And so that spirals into a bigger thing where now teams don't want to play Notre Dame, and as a result, you lose the USC Notre Dame rivalry. That's a great example of the irrationality of college sports. And I think that's why we won't really see any great structural changes, except for maybe to the playoff in any recent years.
So kind of building off that, I want to talk more about like the spending right now for these universities. So we're seeing some schools having to cut these non-revenue sports, because if you look at most schools, the football team is usually the only one that makes revenue, maybe men's and women's basketball as well. But football is the main driver. So now that they have to spend more to compete with their football teams, they're having to cut these other teams. What do you think is the first step in college sports, without Congress getting in, for this problem to be on the way of being solved, of making it even?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And frankly, it's tied very closely to the NCAA as a governing body, and then also to Title IX, which isn't going anywhere, rightfully so. And so there will always be like Title IX obligations that have to do, and that will always keep in particular women's sports strong. And I'm really glad that is there, because we've started seeing, softball, volleyball, women's basketball, et cetera, really start to become a great asset to these universities and a great asset to the sports watching public, because they're extremely competitive and great games. I'm going to be honest, like I think it's kind of a win-win if the idea of club sports, in much in the vein of talking about, the British soccer leagues, is propped up again. So I do unfortunately, quite like, I don't know if it's super unfortunate, but I do think that some of these teams will end up becoming club sports. And my hope is that the prestige and acceptance and willingness to donate to club sports, just more generally outside of the college sphere, uh, grows. But that's where I think it's going. I think like club sports is going to become a much bigger thing, and thus you can source donations directly to those club sports, and that there will be smaller governing bodies regarding each additional club sport, that potentially could also have things outside of the university as well. I think that hopefully, as a society, we can move towards that and kind of grow more community that way. But I think that's going to really be the only option from the NCAA's perspective, or from the college's perspective, is to basically move some of these sports to club.
Well, to go off that, I mean, recently, I mean, a few months ago, Redbird Capital infused like $450 million, roughly in that number, into the Big 12. And you're kind of seeing them take the professional approach now. It's like, if you look at the revenue distribution numbers, they're making 30 million less based off media rights, like things like that. And they're trying to compete. And it's getting to the point where if you're not playing in the SEC, the Big Ten, I mean, there's a huge gap, and $30 million is a lot of money that these schools can be allocating towards, better facilities, better players, things like that. That, taking the business approach, or like making these clubs, would make that more essential, because you have minority stakeholders, and now you open it up to a huge new industry where that these teams, one, can obviously compete, but now there's not all these different regulations like you would see from conference to conference. And now it opens the doors, like you were saying, is like you got the LSU Tulane, hopefully get that game back being a Tulane student. I don't know how that would go for us, but I mean, that would still fill the seats. And I think that would be something both schools would want to see. And that there's this, like, I guess schools are just essentially scared of playing, each other. Like, I thought it was funny how Texas, called out Texas Tech and said, you paid your roster, but if you played us, we would, like we'd beat you. And then they're like, well, let's play, and I think that kind of gives the ability for these teams to actually have those types of games without being like, oh, now we have to go cut off our FCS games and, reschedule and things like that. So I think the new club approach that you mentioned, where you want to see it go, would actually be, a fix, long-term fix.
Yeah, and I think it varies by sport, because if you're talking about like golf, for example, that is going to look substantially different than it looks right now. And in particular, the hard part is going to be like TV rights, right? Like that's going to cause the problem. And the reason why the NCAA exists as it does now is because people like college sports, and it's way easier to bargain for, multiple different, a package of sports rather than just one. And so you said something interesting, like the whole private equity of it all is something that I think is a major unknown here, where it makes a little bit more sense at the conference level, where the conference itself like is generating money, but for the most part, all of these things are nonprofits. So it's kind of unclear what the swap is, right? Because when private equity comes in, it's for some large cash infusion in search of a share of future profits. The bet, I guess, is that TV revenue keeps going up. I just don't like really understand. And the one that I really, really did not understand was the infusion of capital in the University of Utah, where, I mean, that's a public school. And so assumptively, they think that revenues will greater, but it's like unclear what a university whose goal is to educate students, and in this case, has a football team full of students that I guess will be employees at some point, if the trend keeps going. It's unclear, like, so will they cut student tickets? Is that what, like, are they going to raise the price on student tickets? Because then that doesn't really help the university, but that helps the private equity group. So that's something that I'm really confused about. And I actually don't know what is going to happen with it, because it doesn't intuitively make sense to me. And maybe it's just on paper a partnership, but I think it's really hard to predict how the relationship between capital and these now like quite like cost heavy teams will end up working together.
I'm with you there. I did a little research about how private equity works with the NFL. And I think it's pretty cool that the NFL, through its CBA, made rules that private equity can go in, but they can't control more than, like, I think it's 10% of a team. And they also can't have any control in the internal operations. But with college sports, there's no CBA or anything like that. Like you were saying, I don't even know what the deal is. I know private equity is giving Utah money, but like, what exactly are they giving it to? What are they getting in return? Like,
Yeah, I was going to go off that too. Is like you see that each school's getting $30 million. They're going to have to pay $8 million back. So I mean, like they're going to have to find the money somewhere. And what you were saying is like the whole idea of like maybe raising ticket sales. So no, as a student, I'm like, okay, like if I'm deciding between two schools, being like a hypothetical sports fan, it's like, okay, I'm going to go to the school where I can understand that, maybe my games are free. Because I mean, obviously we're all like me and Noah are college students going into our senior year, and like saving that extra dollars, sometimes carries weight. So I mean, it's just like, by accepting this private credit and doing it, I know there's no plan. Like there's no plan with the Big 12 and Redbird of like how this team could essentially generate money or generate revenue. So I guess it's a test run for the NCAA. But what's interesting is like they're the only school to accept it. So like it's gonna be a school to watch out for. See like those little things you were talking about, and maybe that's you understanding a little like analytics. But it's like those small things that like I didn't really think about it as a whole. Is like I didn't know they're gonna raise student tickets, because like that's who's at the school. And like there needs to be a fine line between university and sport. And if it gets to that point, it's understandable where it's like they can charge whatever they want because it's a club. But since you're supporting or like representing a university, you're obligated to essentially allow these students to go to the game for free, and they're basically paying for the football players to be there as well.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting thing with like where this will inevitably go, because once the kids become employees, they're technically employees of the university. The university's goals are not the university's goal from the athletic department is to have a really good football team.
mm,
But in theory, like that's not going to make a ton of money for them in like at the end of the day. In terms of like profit, it's not going to like really. I'm sure it does move the needle at some universities, but for the most part, it's probably a loss, right? So then it becomes a loss leader, a marketing expense. And the goal of the marketing is to get students into the doors, right? Or educate, like there's a non monetary goal here, which is very difficult to kind of play around. And I think you mentioned private equity in the NFL. The NFL is very careful with this because if you're an intense profit-seeking place, there may be an equilibrium that you can hack where it's basically like, hey, we're not going to spend a ton of money. We're just going to cash our massive TV check, and it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to make a difference how much money we make, because like for better or worse, these teams are for the most part fixed income teams. If you look at the percentages, of course, like ticket sales obviously are a massive number, but the grand majority of their revenues, which is in the CBA as outlined, particularly like football and basketball based revenues, are destined to go to 50% of it's destined to go to the players. You're basically at that point a fixed cost, fixed income business for at least 10 to 15 years when you're under that deal. And that's just like not at all the case in college. And it's very hard to try to figure out what that looks like. On the bright side, there's a lot of opportunity to innovate. I just don't think private equity is really the answer, in my opinion, unless I'm missing something.
I'm with you there. I want to change the turn the conversation a little bit to what, because I know you do a little bit of, or you do some scouting with your job, and you evaluate NFL prospects through stats and data and all things like that. I want to talk about how NIL has affected the NFL draft, because it seems like we're seeing in rounds like 4 through 7, there might be a talent drop off now, because those guys who realize they can make more money in college and or maybe these are two separate things, but I want to talk about how the talent has changed, and then also how players can make more money in college than they would in the NFL.
I think that you are correct. I think basically we'll get a better sense of older players. It's basically what we're going to see. And so the analysis that in particular the Cleveland Browns used to take was always draft young players, because there's a reason those older players are not young. They weren't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so that calls into question. I think there's debate on whether, it's worse or better, et cetera. I think it's probably a wash, all things together. I just think we've had 2 really weird drafts. I do think, however, though, that the idea of a quarterback staying, we'll see a lot more of that. Arch Manning and Dante Moore were 2 pretty unique cases. But I do think we will see more of that, because there is such a big upside to being a top 15 pick. And quarterbacks are almost always pushed up. So if you think that you might fall to the second round, there actually is like a financial incentive to be in the top 15 picks. The place where this is really different, though, is the NBA, where in the NBA, really 5 to 10 picks matter. So if you can get more and more shots at getting in those top 5 and top 10 picks, you should do it. Now the pay and in the second round, the pay is for the most part not guaranteed. So basically, if you think you can get in the first round at any point in your NCAA career, you should almost always stay in. You're almost always going to make substantially more money in college. That changes the face of NCAA basketball, because you're going to see players that are much older and really understand college basketball come together and really beat the crap out of young teams that maybe don't have it all together if they're not super duper elite talents. And I think that's kind of what you see in March Madness now. In the last 2 to 3 years, there's been less upsets because these teams are really, really skilled. Like the skill gap has massively increased, and that kind of limits the randomness, especially given that the top players will move up in almost every single case. And so there won't be the John Morants, there won't be the Jay Crowders, there won't be these other folks, I think, for quite a long time, unless they have just one good season and jump to the NBA, for the reason that it doesn't really make sense to leave college at this point if you can go to Michigan and be one of their best players and make a ton of money and improve your chances of being an NBA first round pick.
Yeah, to go off that, I mean, you'll see in like LSU's roster, bring LSU, like, again, it's like they have like, I think their combined average is like 26 years old for their new college basketball roster. So, I mean, like, what's your opinion on that? And then in terms of like, if you're a scout, I know you do a lot of work in the football realm, but it's like, you got a 26-year-old, say he does really well for LSU this year. Like, does that draft and, analytics change? Because like he went to the G League, was all right, and now he's in the college and does well. But like, the way he played would like project him to do well in the NBA as it had, for past college athletes.
Yeah, I think this is where I'll become kind of more of I'll stand up for the colleges a little bit more and not be a player first thing. It's like that actually kind of does hurt the product when you're having guys come back from the G League or back to professional leagues, because functionally you can flip your team just like way too quick. And then you're going to see interest drop because there's not great stories. And like realistically, what sports is storytelling and community building. And so when you can't tell a great story, it's difficult to build a community around a team. Look at the New York Knicks, for example. Jalen Brunson's been on that team for a while. Josh Hart is his best friend. Mikal Bridges is his best friend. Hart, they basically got him out of nowhere, and they kind of stuck with their guys, and it builds into this like massive success of a team that probably on paper was not as good as the Thunder or the Spurs. However, they end up winning quite in fantastic fashion. You just don't have those stories in college basketball anymore, and you used to. And the big place where you see this is college women's basketball, where you see these stories come. I'm right now out in LA. My girlfriend is a USC alum. She worked for the football team for 6 years. I've been to several of the women's basketball games. I'm super duper excited to see Jazzy Davidson and Juju Watkins play together. And Juju's been there for years. Like Caitlin Clark, years. Angel Reese, years. And that's why the stories are so much better in women's college basketball. And so there probably will have to be some type of reset, even if it's just like at the conference level and saying you have to sign these kids to 2 or 3 year contracts or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what it looks like, but I think that's what's basically going to end up happening.
I think if that actually raised a great point I didn't even think about, like, because if all the conferences themselves just agree to do the same, rule, I mean, that could be a temporary fix to a lot of these problems. I know there's all these talks about limiting your transfers, like the 5-and-5 rule, stuff like that. But it would be cool if like all the conferences could just come together and have the same alignment. I don't know what that would take though.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the big problem, because, and we saw this with the Sorsby case. We saw this with Darian Mensah, Tulane to Duke, Duke to Miami, where because these institutions are so highly political and involved in things like the courts, it's very difficult to have any alignment there because people will seek out advantages. So like in the case of the Texas Tech stuff, I'm not saying that they were biased. Like I don't know the case super well. Maybe there was a great legal argument for why he needed an injunction. But like we've seen it with Texas NIL, where all of a sudden Texas can pay anyone. And I think it reminds me a little bit of how like the legal field has gone, where people are taking, associates earlier and earlier and earlier, to the point where it's almost hurting the associates because they already have a big time job coming straight out of college and don't actually have to try in law school. I mean, they do. There's a lot of stuff in the contracts. I bring it up where it's like the contracts are going to have to get a lot stickier and a lot harder to navigate in order to stop kind of both sides from hurting themselves here, where the players could potentially get in a situation where you can't leave, or you are leaving too much, or et cetera. And the colleges could get to a point where, the product's no longer good. So I think that's kind of the direction where it needs to go. It's going to be really hard for the conferences to align, I think, because if the Big Ten does something and the SEC realizes that there's an edge and that they can potentially get like a bigger piece of the pie in terms of television market on Saturdays, then they're going to hunt that out. And so it's difficult, it's delicate, but I think that if the product slips or not, which to be fair, I don't think the college football product is going to slip. I think it's in particular going to be men's college basketball. And once that March Madness revenue starts potentially dropping, that's going to be like when the rules are going to start changing, I think.
Yeah.
So I was just going to add on real quick. Like you see them already trying to make moves for money, like expanding the tournament. Maybe they sense that problem coming, like just what you were saying. I don't know, but
yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. So So obviously here, like our podcast is, we're basically promoting athlete advocacy. You're an athlete yourself. And as we mentioned earlier, you have a unique story from being a football player and then getting into sports analytics. So I kind of want to hone in on that a little bit and hear your side of it. So like, when did you realize, was it earlier on in your football career in college where you're like, in the NFL, I need to go find a job, like find a mentor. And if you had anyone that mentored you through that process, like you can just like talk about it.
Yeah, I was super lucky to be a Tulane alum, where we have multiple general managers and ex general managers all across the board, and so I think really mentorship and networking is the number one thing if you're an athlete, regardless of if you're going to be a professional athlete, to do, because you have access to a lot of people that you probably don't think you do. Like all the boosters, the reason why there's an athletic department are all very wealthy, very well connected, very successful people that would love to talk to you if you say that you're a student athlete because they're invested. And like I was able to kind of parlay that where, a couple, Tulane has an excellent sports law program. When I was a freshman, I just got in touch with two guys at the law school who were 3Ls, and now one, Tim Edwards, is an agent at Excel. The other one, Chris Robertson. Chris Robinson is a executive at the Charlotte Hornets, both in ops, and they were excellent mentors for me, and they basically kind of shepherded me into this world. And so I think if you're a student athlete, realize that kind of everyone on you are in a very unique position where you can use that title of student athlete and you can use that visibility to parlay that into professors' offices, into business people's offices, into even into like places on campus, and you can really take advantage of it. And it's a limited time, right? Like you really only got 3-4 years to do so. So make sure you take advantage of that because you can really network extremely effectively just by saying you're a student athlete interested in X, in a way that you really can't do if you're anyone else.
You were talking earlier about how if you're a student athlete, it's almost like a full-time job, right? You're spending like all these hours, a week, just doing anything for the team. For people like me and Jack, we've had this past, like our whole college career, we have time outside of class to be able to network and find mentors for ourselves. And I think that's a huge problem with college athletes. Like you go to class, you go to practice, you do all the things, but you don't really have that extra time to do extracurriculars. I know your case, you were successful and you utilize that platform, but I think it's a big gap right now in college athletics. So
yeah, I think that people don't realize the resources they have though. Like one of my great mentors was former deputy athletic director Monica LeBron, who was at Tulane and then went to Tennessee and is now doing some great work on social media and coaching. And I just asked her if she could put me in touch with people. And then she kind of became my conduit to meeting some really cool people that were in the Tulane sphere. And those people are literally paid to help. I mean, WAD obviously has a lot more executive stuff, but like the resource staffs, support staffs, academic staffs, like that's their job to help, and they'd really love to help. So definitely take advantage of that as well.
Yeah, and to wrap this up, obviously, you're not an athlete, but we kind of like to hear, cool like anymore. But you have like even like currently you have a unique experience in sports that like made you realize that like this is what I want to do. Obviously with sports becoming an asset class, like a lot of jobs are opening up. So like, do you have any stories of like just like promoting like working in sports, making a change in sports? Any stories like that?
Yeah, I think people don't realize the impacts that sports can have on communities. And I think that it's easy when you're a student athlete and you're kind of forced to volunteer and you're kind of forced to do community service and you're forced to, hear people heckling you or rooting for you and all this stuff, to realize that once you go in the adult world, like it's either on you or no one's paying attention. And so I think some could call it an addiction, I guess, but it's really motivation to be in the community. And I mean, you can name several things. I mean, in the Tulane community itself, I'm in a group of older professionals, I'd say, of lawyers and business folks called the Vigilantes, and they added me to that while I was in college. And so I have a ball cap that says the Vigilantes, which technically would have been an NIL violation at the time, which I did not realize because I would wear that hat on the sidelines when I came off the field. But like those guys just love sports and love football. And I think building that community and understanding that community, and the story that I told on the evaluation, which is our draft show, which you can find on SumerSports YouTube channel, was the thing that really touched me was when I was a senior, again, COVID year, we're getting tested 3 or 4 times a day. I've had like ear swabs, nose swabs, stuff in my mouth, like crazy. It's getting crazy. A Category 5 hurricane hit Lake Charles, completely demolished everything. Like the skyscraper is no longer there. That's how bad the hurricane was. And I kind of thought to myself, like, what can I do? They were moving a lot of evacuees into the Superdome and into hotels in New Orleans, and they were busing them to go eat at a food bank, and there was real calls for canned goods and stuff like that. And so I just like put together a little thing with my business attorney, AK Psy, and some other groups. I was like, hey, just like, I'm going to just drive around and go pick up canned goods. I showed up to the locker room. There were canned goods literally everywhere in my locker. Like I couldn't get dressed. And no one had really said anything to me. I had obviously publicized it, but that's just like how teams work, and that's how communities work. And I think people take that for granted when they are on a team or on TV or playing in a packed stadium. And I just don't think people should take it for granted, because it's really, really something special and something that 100% should be taken advantage of.
Yes, sir. No, we really appreciate you getting on this podcast. It was awesome.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on and sharing your advice.
Yeah, thank y'all, fellas.